Okay, so first of all, we've learned that the heart is made up of two hearts. There's really two hearts, or two pumps. There is a right one and a left one. Now, as you're looking at this picture, you're looking at, this is the heart of your patient. So that's why this is the right side and this is the left, because this is my right arm. If you're looking at my heart, it's going to be on this side. My left side is this side. So that's why it's labeled that way. Now, each pump, each heart is made up of two chambers. An upper chamber called an atrium and a lower chamber called a ventricle. So you'll notice RA for our right atrium, RV for right ventricle. Incidentally, these terms are listed right here at the bottom, right? So right here at the bottom of the page, you can see right atrium and right ventricle, RA and RV. All right, now, on the other side is the left atrium and left ventricle. Now, the job of the right pump, we learned last time on page N3, or N2. N2 is the right pump pumps blood through the so-called pulmonary circuit. What's pulmonary mean? Through the lungs. So the job of the right pump is to pump blood through the lungs. That's what its job is. It pumps blood through the lungs. And why would you pump blood through the lungs? To get oxygen, to pick up oxygen and get rid of CO2. Now the job of the left pump is to pump blood through what we call the systemic circuit. The systemic circuit means all the systems of the body, every part of the body. The skeletal system, the digestive system, the urinary system, the reproductive system, the nervous system, the skin, the endocrines, every system of the body. That's called the systemic circuit. So the left pump pumps blood out through this huge aorta, and it's carrying oxygenated blood away from the heart, and there are all these smaller arteries that branch off the aorta that are carrying oxygenated blood to every single part of the body. But let's walk you through this as we did last time, a little bit more carefully. So there are two major veins we learned last time that bring blood low in oxygen to the right atrium. They're called the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. Vena stands for vein. Cava means cavernous, big. These are big veins. These are the two largest veins in your body. And now, the reason why they're called veins, of course, is because veins carry blood to the heart. Very good. That's the definition. Now, most veins are low in oxygen, and these are low in oxygen. But the main reason why they're called veins is the blood is flowing to the heart. This blood, low in oxygen, goes into the right atrium, down to the right ventricle, and the right ventricle pumps the blood, ejects the blood out into what's called the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery. Now, why is it called an artery? What's an artery do? Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So the blood is flowing away from the heart. This is blood low in oxygen, though, because the whole reason why we agreed why we're sending the blood to the lungs is to get oxygen. So this is blood low in oxygen and high in CO2. As the blood flows through these pulmonary capillaries, this is the pulmonary capillary bed. We learned last class meeting on N2 that a capillary bed is an anastomotic network, an interconnecting network of capillaries. So as the blood flows through these pulmonary capillaries, it gains oxygen, right? It gains oxygen, and it gets rid of CO2. Gains oxygen and removes CO2. All right, now, as this blood now is oxygenated, and it's now flowing through this pulmonary vein. Now, what do veins do? Veins carry blood to the heart, and it is going to the heart. It's going to LA, Los Angeles. Okay, it's going to the left atrium. But this is oxygenated blood. This is blood high in oxygen. Again, I know that if you're saying, but that doesn't make sense, that's because you're using the wrong definition. You think arteries are high in oxygen, veins are low in oxygen. I never said that was the definition. This is a vein, because the blood is flowing to the heart, but it's high in oxygen. This oxygenated blood goes into the left ventricle, And this left ventricle ejects this oxygenated blood out into the largest artery in the body called the aorta. And in fact, the aorta is the largest blood vessel in the whole body. There are many, many smaller arteries that branch off this aorta to carry oxygenated blood to all the different organs. These include, looking at this diagram, they include the carotid arteries. The carotid arteries, as we will be learning in more detail, carry blood up to the head. They include the subclavian arteries, which carry oxygenated blood to the arms. And I don't have to write it because it says it. Now, as the blood goes through the head and through the arms, so it provides oxygen to these parts of the body, and it loses oxygen and gains carbon dioxide. So now this blood is coming back. It's returning back to the heart. This is blood low in oxygen, high in CO2, and it comes back from the head through the jugular vein. Now again, it's called a vein, not technically because it's low in oxygen, although it is. It's called a vein because the blood's heading back to the heart. It's flowing to the heart. Here it is, there's the heart. Now it really should be called the carotid vein because usually the name of the vein is the same as the name of the artery. So if there was a carotid artery carrying blood up to the head, should be a carotid vein bringing it down. But this is the exception. Most of the time they are the same name. This is the one of the few times where it's not the same name. There are subclavian veins that are bringing blood back down from the arms. So that matches the subclavian arteries. Now the jugular vein and subclavian veins join together to form the superior vena cava. So the superior vena cava, we learned last time, is called that because it's bringing blood from the upper part of your body, your head and arms, to the heart, from the superior or upper part of your body. Okay, now what other arteries branch off the aorta? So there are these mesenteric arteries that carry oxygenated blood to the digestive tract. Now, when I teach Biology 3, we just say mesenteric arteries. Hey, that's good enough for people who hate science. But whether you like science or not, you're in a science majors course. So we're going to be learning there are 3 mesenteric arteries, 3 of them, and you can write them down right here. There's the celiac artery. There is the superior mesenteric artery. And there is the inferior mesenteric artery. So there are really 3 mesenteric arteries. Now, mesenteric, and you might say, I can't see what you wrote. Okay. Mesenteric refers to the digestive tract. So even though this picture is very simple and it just shows one, there's really 3 major arteries: celiac, superior mesenteric, and inferior mesenteric. Now, what do they do? Which parts of the digestive system are they supplying? The celiac is supplying oxygenated blood to your stomach, to your liver, to the pancreas, to the spleen. Okay, stomach, liver, pancreas, and spleen. Really what it's supplying is the big organs in the upper part of your abdomen. Because in the upper part of your abdomen, as we know, are your stomach and liver and pancreas and so on. So those are the organs in the upper part of your abdomen. The superior mesenteric artery is carrying oxygenated blood to the small intestine. And the inferior mesenteric artery is carrying oxygenated blood to the, what do you want to guess? Large intestine. Good. So you can see that the celiac is really carrying oxygenated blood to the upper part of the abdomen, the superior mesenteric to kind of the middle of the abdomen, and the inferior mesenteric, the lower part of the abdomen where the large intestine is. Now, as this blood, this oxygenated blood flows through these capillaries of the digestive tract, if you've got food in your intestine, haven't we learned that the water-soluble nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream? Thank you, just say yes, because we have learned it. All right? If you want to see a picture of where we've talked about this, of how the water-soluble nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream, just look on J31. Remember this? And on J31, we learned that the water-soluble nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream and carried by the hepatic portal vein to the liver. So on our picture that we're looking at right now, you can see that as the blood goes through these capillaries of the digestive tract, sugars, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals can be absorbed from the digestive tract into the bloodstream, and they are carried by the, here it is, hepatic portal vein right to the liver. And we've learned why the nutrients are carried to the liver and what the liver does with them. What does the liver principally do with all those nutrients? It stores them. It stores the sugars, the glucose as, stores glucose as glycogen, right? And it converts, it stores fats, it makes cholesterol, and it converts amino acids into proteins. So we've covered, last class meeting, we learned all these different functions of the liver. Right? So if at the end of this course, somebody asks you, what does your liver do? And you say, I don't know, it has something to do with something. Then you need to take this class again. Okay? Because if you're going to go into the healthcare field, you got to know what a liver does. Big organ, biggest organ in your body. So the blood leaves the liver through the hepatic vein, which connects up with the inferior vena cava. Let's look at another artery that branches off the aorta, the renal arteries. Renal, of course, means kidney, and so these renal arteries are carrying oxygenated blood to the kidneys. All right, and then the blood leaves the kidneys through the renal vein, which connects up with the inferior vena cava. Incidentally, what do kidneys do? They filter waste products out of the bloodstream, right? They filter waste products. We're going to learn more about that, but certainly you should know at this point that they filter waste products out of the bloodstream. Other arteries that branch off the aorta are the iliac arteries. Now, the iliac arteries are called that because they branch off the aorta right around the ilium of the pelvis. And they carry oxygenated blood into the pelvis and the legs. And then the blood comes back through the iliac vein, which connects up again with the inferior vena cava. So we can see, this is just an example of some of the arteries that branch off the aorta. These mesenteric arteries carrying oxygenated blood to your digestive tract, the renal arteries carrying oxygenated blood to your kidneys, the iliac arteries carry oxygenated blood to your legs, and then this blood flows back towards the heart via the inferior vena cava. So this is blood low in oxygen, it comes back to the heart, and we start all over again. We're going to repump the blood back through the lungs to reoxygenate it, and then it's going to go to the left pump, and the left pump again is going to pump this oxygenated blood to all the organs of the body. Now before we leave this picture, let's consider a couple of things here. Just looking up here, right by the lungs. All right? So we learned that the blood low in oxygen goes through the pulmonary artery, it passes through the capillaries of the lungs, it becomes oxygenated, right? It gains oxygen, and this oxygenated blood comes back to the left pump. Right? We know that. We covered that multiple times. So, if on the third exam, if I ask you, and I will, true or false, the pulmonary vein is high in oxygen, carries a blood high in oxygenated blood. True or false, the pulmonary vein? It's true. The pulmonary vein is carrying blood, oxygenated blood to the left atrium. You got to know that. Let's look at another aspect on this diagram before we leave it. Now, we said oxygenated blood's carried to the digestive tract, and that provides oxygen for your organs of your digestive tract. And then we said if you have food in your intestine, you're going to be absorbing all these nutrients, all the sugars and vitamins and minerals and amino acids, and they're carried in this hepatic portal vein right to the liver. If I were to ask you, which blood vessel is higher in vitamins and minerals and sugars and amino acids, the mesenteric artery or the hepatic portal vein? The hepatic portal vein. All these nutrients that are absorbed from the digestive tract are going right to the liver. It's really high in nutrients. Now, if I asked you, on the other hand, if I asked you which blood vessel, the mesenteric artery or the hepatic portal vein, was, let's say, higher in oxygen, the mesenteric artery, it's bringing oxygenated blood. So you've got to look at exactly what's going on. Let's try one more example. And incidentally, what I'm testing you on right now, I do in Biology 3. I ask the same questions. Looking at the renal artery. Now, the renal artery is bringing oxygenated blood to the kidneys, and the blood leaves the kidneys through the renal vein. So clearly, if I asked you which blood vessel is higher in oxygen, the renal artery or renal vein, which is higher in oxygen? The artery is bringing oxygenated blood. But what if I asked you which blood vessel is higher in waste products? Which one's got more waste products in it, the renal artery or renal vein? The renal artery. Because as the blood goes through the kidneys, what do the kidneys do with the waste products? They remove them. That's what your kidneys remove the waste products. So the blood coming out of your kidneys is lower in waste products than the blood going in. Now, the point that we're really trying to make is this, and I say this in Bio 3 when I teach it. What most students want to say, because this is how you're taught in elementary school, is you want to say arteries are good, veins are bad. But the body is more complicated than that. You always have to look, as the blood flows through an organ, how does that organ change the chemical composition of the blood? Kidneys remove waste products from the blood. That's how they change the chemical composition. As the blood goes through the digestive tract, how do the intestines change the chemical composition? They absorb nutrients. So their nutrients are being added to the bloodstream. As the blood flows through the lungs, how is the chemical composition changed? It gains oxygen. So it's not that artery good, vein bad. In fact, you would have been wrong in almost all these cases. You have to ask, what is the function of that organ as the blood flows through it? Is it to add nutrients? Is it to remove waste products? Is it to gain oxygen? What's the purpose of that organ? Now, let's look at a kind of a strange diagram on the back side. On the back side. So on the back, this is a schematic diagram. A schematic diagram of the circulatory system. Okay, if anybody needs this handout, we gave it last time, but I get more copies. All right, so this is the diagram we use in physiology. Because physiology doesn't care what organs look like, it's interested in how the body works. But in many ways, this is a very useful diagram, even for us in anatomy. So while this doesn't look like any organs, it really shows, it's like a map. It's like a street map. You get a good idea of how the blood's flowing. Now, let's start right up here, because you're going to have to know all this. We know there's a right pump and a left pump. And each pump is made up of two chambers, an atrium followed by a ventricle. So let's start with the RA, which is the right atrium. So the blood, low in oxygen, comes into this right atrium. Right? And it's coming from these vena cava. All right? And the blood comes in, and it goes from the right atrium into the RV, the right ventricle. Now there is a valve that controls the flow of blood between the right atrium and right ventricle. This valve is called the right AV valve, or tricuspid valve.
You'd say, what, do we have to know that?
Yes.
You'd say, which term?
Both. All right? Just want to be clear. You need to know both names. Now, what is the function of a valve or sphincter? One-way flow. Remember that? So we talked about pyloric valves, right? And ileocecal valves or sphincters. We said there's valves all over our body. And the purpose of a valve or sphincter is to ensure one-way flow. So the purpose of this valve is to allow the blood to go from the right atrium to the right ventricle, but prevent it from going backwards. So that would mean that if somebody has a valve problem, the blood might, in fact, start to go backwards, which wouldn't be very good, would it? If blood starts to flow backwards on your heart. Now, the right ventricle ejects the blood into the pulmonary artery. And there is a valve that controls the flow of blood that allows the blood to go in only one direction. It's called a pulmonary valve. Now, the pulmonary valve, it belongs to a group, two valves that are collectively called semilunar valves. So I'm just going to write in parentheses, it's also known as a semilunar valve. Semilunar.
You might say, I can't read that. Okay.
Semilunar. L-U-N-A-R is the last part. So it's a pulmonary or semilunar valve. Now, again, this allows the blood to go from the from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery, but not backwards. Now, what's the pulmonary artery do? Well, first of all, what does an artery do? Artery carries blood away from the heart, and the blood is going away from the heart. And it's called pulmonary because it's going to the lungs. That's not any
Thanks, pointers. Thanks a lot.
All right, so it's going to the lungs. So of course, as the blood flows through the lungs, what happens? It gains oxygen, as we've learned, gains oxygen, and removes CO2. Incidentally, just to remind you of what all this is about, all this relates to cellular respiration. Because if you've had biology, and you will certainly cover this, is cellular respiration in both microbiology and physiology, both. The whole idea is to produce ATP by breaking down foods with oxygen. And in the process, a waste product called carbon dioxide is generated. So it's all related to energy production. Anyhow, this oxygenated blood now flows through the pulmonary vein to the left atrium. And of course, why it's called a vein is that the blood is flowing to the heart. Flowing to the heart, to the left atrium of the heart. This is oxygenated blood. Now, the blood's going to go from the left atrium into the left ventricle. And there is a valve that controls the flow of blood between the left atrium and left ventricle, and it's known by three names. Three names. The left AV valve, the bicuspid valve, or the mitral valve. And if you're wondering, well, which name do you have to know? The answer is all three. Interestingly, the name that's used in physiology is usually this name. The name that's used in anatomy is usually that name. And the name that most doctors call it is the third name. Listen, as I've told you before, don't blame me. I'm not responsible for naming things. I'm just here to teach you what things are called. All right, now the left ventricle ejects the blood out into the
Aorta.
and there is a valve that controls the flow of blood between the left ventricle and aorta called the aortic valve. It's also a semilunar valve. So in other words, there are really two valves that are called semilunar valves. That was the pulmonary valve and the aortic valve are called semilunar valves. So this controls the flow of blood, allows the blood to go from the left ventricle into the aorta, but prevents it from going backwards. Now, what this shows, and this is again a pretty neat diagram, is how the oxygenated blood's flowing through this aorta, and you can see all the various smaller arteries that branch off the aorta. So you can see that, in fact, the very first artery that branches off the aorta is called the coronary artery. That's really the very first artery branching off the aorta. What does the coronary artery do? It carries oxygenated blood to the, anybody know? Coronary arteries?
Right.
The heart. The heart. If somebody has a heart attack, they'll sometimes call that a coronary. Okay? So this is carried, so the first organ that gets its own oxygenated blood is the heart itself. Okay, and then among the next arteries that branch off the aorta are the carotid arteries. And carotid arteries, as we've seen on the previous slide, carry oxygenated blood to the head. And then among the next arteries that branch off the aorta are the subclavian arteries, which are carrying oxygenated blood to the arms. And then there are the mesenteric arteries branching off the aorta, carrying oxygenated blood to the digestive tract. And we've learned on the previous page that there's really three mesenteric arteries. There's a celiac artery, and then there's a superior and inferior mesenteric. Now, incidentally, just as a side note,
You might say where you misspelled it, you wrote COE.
Up until about 5 years ago, they used to spell celiac, C-O-E-L-I-A-C. And in fact, in Britain, in British English, they still spell it that way. But in American English, they simplified it and they stopped using the O. So they just write celiac. So that just changed in the last few years. Things sometimes change. Anyhow, and then there's two mesenteric arteries, superior and inferior. On the previous page, we told you that they carry oxygenated blood to slightly different places. Now, as the blood goes through the digestive tract, it's going to pick up nutrients, and these nutrients are carried via the hepatic portal vein to the liver. So this is a kind of cute little schematic diagram. It's like a road map. You can see it is kind of showing you, like a road map, a street map, of how things are flowing, even though it doesn't show the actual organs. Also branching off the aorta are the renal arteries carrying oxygenated blood to the kidneys. Also branching off the aorta are the iliac arteries carrying oxygenated blood to your legs. So this is showing just a few examples of these arteries, these littler arteries branching off the aorta, carrying oxygenated blood to all the organs of the body. Now, of course, this blood now has to head back. So here in the head, the blood comes back from the head via the jugular vein. From the arms, comes back from the arms to the subclavian vein. From the liver through the hepatic vein. From the kidney, the renal veins. And from the legs, the iliac veins. And you'll notice that the names of the veins are similar to the arteries in most cases, with just a couple of exceptions. And then this blood flows back through these big vena cava. And in this picture, it doesn't show two, it just says cavae, plural. There's really two, a superior and inferior. They bring this blood low in oxygen back to the right atrium, and we start all over again. Incidentally, blood from the heart comes back through the coronary sinus vein. So this is a nice diagram. Now, let me get right to the point. You really need to know this diagram. And the most important part, the most important of this diagram to really know, backwards, forwards, and sideways, begins with the right atrium. So you need to know from here to here, and literally, because I'm going to ask you to do this on the lab test, write it on a blank sheet of paper. So you need to be able to know that blood goes from the vena cava, from the right atrium, right AV valve, right ventricle, pulmonary valve, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary vein, left atrium, left AV valve, left ventricle, aortic valve, aorta. Because the heart is the second most important organ in the entire body. Your brain is number one, and the second most important organ is the heart. If you don't understand the heart, you don't understand the second most important organ in the body. You can't be in the health field if you don't know the heart. It's as simple as that. So you got to know how blood is flowing through the heart. All right, we're gonna go over this multiple times, but that's one thing you're just going to practice. It's not that hard. It shouldn't be that difficult, but if you need to practice, you're going to practice that over and over until you can write it on a blank sheet of paper. Okay, so now that we've given you the big picture of how blood flows through the body, let's look on page N6. The first thing it points out is that there's something called the atrial ventricular or coronary sulcus. And we'd say, what the heck is that? Now, a sulcus is a groove or furrow. It's a groove. it's a indentation. It's a furrow. And it's, this is a furrow or indentation that's located right in here. Right in this area right here. Now, it's known as the atrioventricular because it's found between the atria and ventricles. You'd say, what? These are the atria up here, the right and left atria. These are the ventricles, the right and left ventricles. So there is a groove right in here called the atrioventricular sulcus. They don't use the word groove, they call it a sulcus. Because it's right between the upper atria and the lower ventricles. It's also known as the coronary sulcus, as another name, because what is located in this groove are the coronary blood vessels. We just mentioned that the word coronary refers to the heart. We said if somebody had a heart attack, they might say they had a coronary. So these are the coronary blood vessels. There's coronary arteries and coronary veins. So what the picture you have at the top is the same picture that we were just looking at, just bigger. So we can see that this is where that sulcus is, and we have these big blood vessels. On N7, let's look at the bottom here, the bottom of N7. And on the bottom of N7, so we know that there are these upper chambers called an atrium and a lower chamber called a ventricle. The atrium we call receiving chambers because they receive the blood from the veins, and the ventricles are the ejecting chambers. They are what eject the blood. Now, the right atrium, we wrote, receives blood from actually 3 veins. There are 3 veins that bring blood low in oxygen into the right atrium. 2 of them we've already talked about multiple times, the superior vena cava and inferior vena cava. There's a 3rd vein that also brings blood low in oxygen into the right atrium, and that's the coronary sinus. We're going to show you, let's look at a picture to see that. Now, the top picture, let me also say that this top picture is a view of the heart from the back side. So this is a posterior view. Posterior means back side. Now, we talked about this last class meeting. If you're looking at me from the front, so that I'm facing the opposite direction of you, you're facing this way, I'm facing that way, my right is on your left side. But if we're facing the same direction, then my right corresponds with your right. So whenever you're looking at somebody from the back side, you're looking in the same direction, so their right and left correspond. So that's true with this back view. So this is really this is the right atrium up here. This is the right ventricle. So on this side, I've kind of made this line here. This is the right side of the heart. This is the left side. Okay, right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. So if this is the right atrium up here, there are 3 veins that it shows blood is flowing into. It shows the superior vena cava right here. Does everybody see it? That's bringing blood low in oxygen from the upper part of the body into the right atrium. There is the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava right here, which is bringing blood from the lower part of the body to the right atrium. So far, that's 2 big veins. And the 3rd vein is this vein right here called the coronary sinus. And I'm going to highlight it. It's right here. This is the coronary sinus, and it's bringing blood low in oxygen from the heart into the right atrium. Now, in fact, if you look carefully at the coronary sinus, you'll notice that it actually has cardiac veins. There are cardiac veins that are flowing into it. Can you make that out? There's veins flowing into it. So these are cardiac veins that are bringing blood into this large vein called a coronary sinus. Now the word sinus sometimes that word sinus is used to refer to a vein. I'm going to explain at another time why they use the word sinus. But for the moment, when you see that word sinus, that can be a way of referring to a thin-walled vein. So this is a thin-walled vein, so it's called the sinus, a coronary sinus. So, to repeat, there are 3 veins bringing blood low in oxygen to the right atrium. This is the right atrium right here. The superior vena cava is bringing blood from the upper part of the body to the right atrium. The inferior vena cava is bringing blood from the lower part of the body. And the coronary sinus is bringing blood from the heart itself into the right atrium. Let's show you another way of visualizing this. And so we're looking at page 017, section O. Okay, now what I've tried to do, and we're going to see lots of pictures, but I've tried to create a lot of kind of what are called flow charts. Flow charts are a way of understanding how this works. So here's the right atrium. There are 3 veins bringing blood to the right atrium. The superior vena cava is bringing blood from the upper part of the body. The inferior vena cava is bringing blood from the lower part of the body. And the coronary sinus is bringing blood from the heart itself. Is that pretty simple? Now, let's just see, just to follow the rest of this, because the rest should be pretty simple now. The blood goes from the right atrium into the right ventricle. And isn't there a valve that controls the flow in between, called the right AV valve? Incidentally, it's also known as the tricuspid valve. And the blood goes into the right ventricle, and then the blood goes out through the right ventricle in the pulmonary artery. The pulmonary artery. There is a valve that controls the flow of blood between the right ventricle and the pulmonary artery called the pulmonary valve. All right? It's a semilunar valve. And you're exactly right when you said or. That was very good, because one of the best ways to learn this, as I told you, is this diagram. Because this really makes it simple, doesn't it? Right? Because you can see this really simple. That's why I think this is a very useful thing. But this is showing the same thing. Incidentally, I believe that I added in most of yours, and if it's not added right here, this is actually technically called the pulmonary artery trunk. So if it doesn't have that word trunk after, just add it. And then what happens is that the pulmonary artery trunk bifurcates. You'd say it does who? We're going to see this word, I'm going to use this word a lot. Bifurcates. Bifurcate means to divide into 2. Right? Bicycle has how many wheels? 2. Bifurcate means to divide into 2. So the pulmonary artery trunk bifurcates into a right pulmonary artery and a left pulmonary artery. And here's why. The right pulmonary artery carries blood to the right lung, and the left pulmonary artery carries blood to the left lung, because you have 2 lungs. And then this blood gets oxygenated in the lungs, gains oxygen, and it comes back to the left atrium. And there is actually 2 right pulmonary veins and 2 left pulmonary veins. So I may have written 2 in front of these, but if I didn't, there are actually 2 right pulmonary veins and 2 left pulmonary veins. And so altogether, 4 pulmonary veins bring oxygenated blood to the left atrium. Okay, so I know that I've just covered some stuff. We've got to walk you through all this. But up here, so we've been saying 3 veins bring blood to the right atrium. And then the blood goes from the right atrium to the right ventricle, and the right ventricle ejects blood out into the pulmonary artery trunk. Let's show you a picture of that. So the picture we can look at is, let's look on this handout we gave you. We've looked on the handout we gave you. We saw the 3 veins that bring blood into the right atrium. And now I want to look at the bottom picture. This is an anterior view. What's that mean? It's the front side. So when you're looking at somebody from the front, not from the back, so their right and left is opposite of your right and left. So in this picture, this is the left side of the heart. This is the left side here. The other side is the right. So let's look at this. And right here, can you see it says right atrium? Everybody see that? Right atrium. So on your left side, because we're looking at the person from the front. This picture shows two of the three veins that bring blood low in oxygen to the right atrium. There are three veins. It shows two of them. Here's the superior vena cava. And down here, here's the inferior vena cava. So what it's showing is that the blood from the upper part of the body is going through down through the superior vena cava to the right atrium. The inferior vena cava, blood from the lower part of the body, is going up into the right atrium. Now there's really one more vein, the coronary sinus, but the coronary sinus can't be seen in this view. All right? So you'd say, well then how would I see it? In the upper picture. In this upper picture show the three veins bringing blood to the right atrium. Right? Superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, coronary sinus. In this view, we can only see two of the three. Now, the blood is going to go from this right atrium past this valve. What's this valve? The tricuspid valve. What's the other name for the tricuspid? The right AV valve. So this is the tricuspid or right AV valve, and the blood goes down here to the right ventricle. Let me tell you a little bit about the valve. The valve is made up of flaps called cusps. The cusps are flaps. How many cusps or flaps does this valve have? 3. That's why it's called the tricuspid valve. 3 flaps. So the anatomists call it tricuspid because they're describing its shape. The physiologists like to call it the right AV valve, and that's the term I like, but I'm trained as a physiologist, because it's located between the right atrium and right ventricle. Right AV, atrioventricular, between the right atrium and right ventricle. Now, these cusps or flaps are held in place by tendon-like cords. There are these tendon-like cords that are holding these cusps of the valve in place. What do we call these tendon-like cords? They're called chordae tendineae. What does chordae tendineae mean? Tendon-like cords. They're like tendons or cords. They're like guy wires anchoring those cusps to the heart. Now, these cords are attached to muscle on the inner wall of the heart, and this muscle on the inner wall of the heart is called papillary muscle. So that's what those tendon-like cords are attached to, is this rough muscle in the inside of the heart called papillary muscle. Now, I'm just describing the picture. Everything I'm saying, though, is written in your lecture outline, as we're going to see. I'm just describing the picture. We'll show you where it's written in a moment. The blood goes from the right atrium past this tricuspid or right AV valve into the right ventricle. And then the right ventricle is going to eject the blood up into the pulmonary artery trunk. And right up here, this is the pulmonary artery trunk. You'd say where? Right here. And I'm going to add the word trunk here. It's the pulmonary artery trunk. Notice that there is a valve that controls the flow. This valve right here is called the pulmonary valve. And this time it's already written for you. Another name for it is a semilunar valve. So the blood is going from the right atrium past this tricuspid or right AV valve into the right ventricle, from the right ventricle past the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary artery trunk. And then you might be able to even see how the pulmonary artery trunk is shown bifurcating or dividing and forming a right and left pulmonary artery. Let's just summarize what I just said, right? I just said its blood goes from the right atrium, right AV valve, right ventricle, pulmonary valve, pulmonary artery trunk, right and left point. You'd say, whoa, 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 whoa. Okay, good. So let's summarize this by looking at the picture we were just looking at earlier, page 017. Look at 017, because this is all lays it out for you as clearly as I know how. All right? So here, how's the blood go on 017? It goes from the right atrium, past the right AV valve, into the right ventricle, past the pulmonary valve, into the pulmonary artery trunk, dividing into a right and left pulmonary artery. Isn't that kind of just laying it out, mapping it out? Now this is the anatomy is this. This is what it looks like. This is just me describing how it's flowing, how the blood's flowing, where we're naming the structures in order. Now, do you think it's important to know how blood flows through your body? Or that's not important? Okay, yeah, it is important. All right, so let's show you where I've written all this junk down by going back to page N8. I'm sorry, N9. On N9, page N9. This is page N9. So I wrote on N9, the right atrioventricular, or AV valve, which is also known as the tricuspid valve. Why is it called tricuspid? Because there are 3 endocardial cusps, or folds, right, flaps. And the purpose of these valves is always to prevent backflow, to prevent regurgitation. That's another way of saying one-way flow. We don't want blood going backwards. If it goes backwards, we say it regurgitates. Regurgitates means it's going backwards. Now the blood goes into the right ventricle. Now of course the right heart is on the anterior side of the body. Remember, the left pump is on the back side. We talked about that last time. If you're thinking, well, when did you tell us that? On N5. On N5, we said that when you view the heart from the front, you mostly see the right pump, because the left pump is on the back side of the body. So that's what we wrote here, that the right ventricle is on the anterior side. The chordae tendineae, remember those? Those are dense, fibrous connective tissue cords that anchor the AV valve cusps to the papillary muscle. Exactly what I was describing. So I wrote it for you. And the whole purpose of these chordae tendineae is to prevent the valve cusp from turning inside out.
You'd say, well, like, would they ever do that?
Yes, that's called a prolapsed valve. So if they become inverted, that's called prolapse. You don't have to know that, but the whole purpose is to normally prevent that from happening. Now, the right ventricle ejects blood out into the pulmonary artery trunk. And there is a valve, a pulmonary valve, which consists of 3 semilunar cusps. That's why another name for the pulmonary valve is a semilunar valve. And its job is to prevent backflow of blood from the pulmonary artery trunk back into the right ventricle. Again, to ensure one-way flow. That's the purpose of it, ensure one-way flow. All right, so the blood goes through the pulmonary arteries to the lungs, and it becomes oxygenated. Let's go back to 017. On 017, this is 017. So the blood's going to go from the pulmonary artery trunk. It'll bifurcate, forming a right pulmonary artery, a left pulmonary artery, that will carry the blood to the right and left lungs. The blood becomes oxygenated, and it flows back through 2 right pulmonary veins from the right lung and 2 left pulmonary veins from the left lung. And these 4 pulmonary veins bring oxygenated blood to the left atrium. Let's show you some pictures. So first of all, let's look at the handout we gave you today, the handout. In the handout, let's look at the top picture. In the top picture of the handout we gave you, this is the left atrium. that right? This was the right atrium. This is the left atrium, right up here. Left atrium. There are 4 pulmonary veins bringing oxygenated blood to the left atrium.
You'd say, whoa, what do you mean 4?
There are 2 left pulmonary veins bringing oxygenated blood from the left lung, and 2 right pulmonary veins bringing oxygenated blood from the right lung. 4 pulmonary veins. They are bringing oxygenated blood, 2 from the left lung, 2 from the right lung. So 4 pulmonary veins bring oxygenated blood to the left atrium. And then it's going to go from the left atrium down into the left ventricle. Let's see another view. Let's look at the bottom picture. In the bottom picture, let's find the left atrium. Now remember, the bottom picture is an anterior view. So here's the left atrium here. Can you see 4 arrows? Why did they draw 4 arrows? Because there are 4 pulmonary veins bringing oxygenated blood into the left atrium. And it shows the blood going from the left atrium into the left ventricle. This is the left ventricle here. Now, this valve right here is the valve between the left atrium and left ventricle. It goes by 3 names. It's called the bicuspid valve. It's also known as the left AV valve. This is written multiple places in your lecture outline. It's also known as the mitral valve. It controls the flow of blood between the left atrium and left ventricle. And just as there were chordae tendineae anchoring the cusps or flaps of the tricuspid valve on the muscle inside the right ventricle, similarly, there are chordae tendineae, tendon-like cords, anchoring these cusps of the bicuspid valve to muscle on the inside of the left ventricle. Now, of course, this is called bicuspid because it has only 2 cusps or flaps.
You'd say, did you write any of this stuff down?
Yeah, I did. Let's look on N9. N9. So on page N9, we wrote on N9, the left atrium receives blood from 2 right pulmonary veins and 2 left pulmonary veins. This is bringing oxygenated blood into the left atrium. All right, so the blood flows from the left atrium past this valve called the left AV valve, which is also known as the bicuspid or mitral valve. Again, anatomists tend to call it bicuspid because they're describing what it looks like, and it's got 2 cusps. The physiologists like the term left atrioventricular because it's between the left atrium and left ventricle, left AV valve. And the doctors call it the mitral valve for no reason whatsoever. There's no reason, but that's the term they like. So it's made up of 2 folds, 2 flaps, and again, it prevents regurgitation. In other words, it ensures one-way flow. And then if we look at N10, on N10, the blood goes into this is N10. The blood goes into the left ventricle, and we wrote the left ventricle, hey, the left pump is on the back side, the posterior side of your body, because the right pump is on the anterior side. You'd say, you told us that before, right? Yes, I did. And we saw the picture last time that showed exactly that. This picture right here. The right pump is on the front, the left pump's on the back side. All right, the chordae tendineae anchor the AV valve cusps. to the muscle on the inside of the left ventricle. The left ventricle ejects blood out into the aorta. The aortic valve is made up of 3 semilunar cusps. That's why the aortic valve is also called a semilunar valve. And the purpose is to prevent regurgitation. In other words, the purpose of this valve is one-way flow. That's always the purpose of these valves, one-way flow. In the picture at the top, it shows what these 4 valves look like. This is the tricuspid. It has 1, 2, 3 flaps. This is the bicuspid. It has 2 flaps. And the pulmonary and aortic valve look identical. They're both said to be semilunar shaped valves. They have 3 cusps as well, but they're shaped a little bit differently than the tricuspid. So they're called semilunar shaped.